This is Duke University.
Hello, as a quick intro, my name is Devin. I was a biomedical PhD student at Duke from '09 until 2015. I love the potential and the challenge of the biotech field and have been working at an early stage cell therapy company since leaving Duke, so for the past 6.5 years or so. So I did not go straight into my PhD from undergrad. Instead, I spent some time working at a medical device startup in the Bay Area, followed by a year-long Whitaker Fellowship in Basel, Switzerland. These experiences helped refine my thoughts on what I wanted to do in a career. And while I knew I wanted to be in industry going into my PhD, I thought a PhD, could help me take me where I thought there were more interesting industry routes. And so, I was a little bit atypical compared to many PhD students who do want to go into academia and a tenure track position. In terms of advice, there's obviously many things to consider before making a large 5-year time commitment, but I'll highlight 3 things that come to my mind. One, have an idea of what you want to do after your PhD. And frankly, if the PhD isn't a huge value add to that thing, consider other career routes. I feel like I've seen some people go into grad school because they don't know what else to do, and I would argue that's a pretty big waste of time. 2, how do you deal with ambiguity? If you enjoy it and you want to get better at adding structure and exploring unknown areas, a PhD is great. But if you really hate ambiguity, PhD might not be for you. And finally, you certainly have to work a lot in a PhD program, but there's room for plenty of fun. So be cognizant of your lab's culture when you're picking a lab, and then hopefully you're in a lab that has a kind of social dynamic that is appropriate for you, and leave time for friendships in the broader community. I certainly did that while at Duke, and have formed many close friendships that I'm still close with to this day. So for me, I was always focused on industry careers. I paid close attention to early stage companies throughout my time at Duke. I always liked the field of regenerative medicine, but it's not quite ready, or particularly when I was doing my PhD, it wasn't quite ready for prime time from an industry standpoint. And so then I was looking at tangential industry kind of focus areas that would be most relevant to that. And so, I primarily ended up looking at cell therapy companies once I got closer to graduation. And indeed, that's where I ended up after my time at Duke. So my career path at Squeeze, I started off as a bench scientist, but I was hired partially because of my interest and limited experience on kind of business strategy. I had taken classes at Fuqua while at Duke and generally liked to keep a pulse on industry trends. Because the company was super small then, it was a startup. It had just had its Series A funding. There were only about 15 people. And so I was able to do the classic wear many hats and do many roles. And a big element was that was doing external partnerships. So I was doing bench scientists, but also working a lot with external partners. After a few years, I had the opportunity to focus entirely on business development and corporate strategy, which is not necessarily typical that early in a scientist's career, but it was a great experience. I learned a ton. And I was able to dive into quite a few interesting projects. I also realized after some time there that I wasn't quite ready to give up directly being involved with science. And so then about 2 years ago, I had the chance to build out a new discovery team, kind of the early stage research within Squeeze. And so I took that role, and now I'm leading a team of 8 fantastic scientists and research associates. So what exactly is the research development or department or the exploratory research department? And so I'm in exploratory. Every company has slightly different names for the same thing. We are basically, by big pharma standards, we're a discovery group. We're a scrappy department, though. We do a lot of early stage projects. At Squeeze, we really define exploratory programs that are not yet fully formed, and there's not yet enough commitment to initiate IND enabling studies, so taking them to the clinic. Once a program is ready to move to the clinic, then we shift it to R&D, and they do the more rigorous studies necessary for a clinical trial. On the like side, I love the people that I work with, the scientific freedom that we have to try challenging new ideas. That's not a guarantee everywhere, but certainly I've been fortunate enough to have that. And also really the ability to translate ideas quickly. One of my earlier projects is currently in an ongoing phase 1 trial. And so, it's nice to be able to see that whole, it's not the whole life cycle. Hopefully the clinical trial shows safety and efficacy and it's able to go into people, but still, from concept to being in a clinical trial is fantastic. And I've actually just recently had a second project transferred to R&D and hopefully going to the clinic shortly after that. There's plenty of challenges in the field. To name a few, knowing when to stop a project is really challenging. It's easy to, if you get great data, it's easy to say yes, move forward. But if you get negative data, do you try harder? Do you dig deeper, or at what point do you call it? So that's certainly a challenge. Rightfully so. There's a lot of strong opinions in the field, and people are always, think, you should go route A, route B, or route C. And so balancing those, respecting them, but then also having your own strong opinion to throw into the mix and make a decision when needed is always important, but also a challenge. And then finally, particularly in really early stage research, something I think about a lot is when to focus a project and dive down into a specific element of it, or when do you cast a wider net? And there's pros and cons to both, but it's a question that I wrestle with a lot in the exploratory department. Some of my favorite projects to lead. It's really hard to pick a favorite. The project we recently transferred is really exciting. It's a T-cell therapy, and the current version of this therapy clinically requires co-treatments that have a whole bunch of negative side effects. And so what my team did is we worked to engineer these cells to be more potent and more importantly, not need those clinical co-treatments. And so hopefully that will make it a better therapy. And, in my role, not only are we doing that, but, doing that project, but you have to pressure test it. And so we've talked to different experts in the field, different clinicians, and it's been really satisfying talking to, say, a clinician who sees the vision, sees the early data, and gets super excited about the potential for this type of project. I guess I'll keep this one short. It's a rewarding field. There's a lot of different paths. Get to know the different paths in industry, if industry is the route that you want to go, and understand the nuances. There's translational medicine, there's process development, there's business development, and more. And all of them have their own nuances, and different people fall in love with different paths. The past year has seen a significant contraction in biotech funding. So frankly, I think times will be a little bit tighter in the near future. That being said, great ideas are still moving forward, and there's certainly demand. There's always demand for bright individuals. And so, relative to 2 or 3 years ago when money was flowing everywhere in the biotech industry, it's not quite like that right now, but I don't think, depending on what you read, be cognizant of that, but at the same time, don't despair at that. And in terms of what skills it's helpful to develop, one thing that stood out to me is just when I interview people, not everyone's able to give the context of their experiences or their work. And so being able to think through and speak to the context is immensely helpful for not just interviews, but just whenever you're communicating with people. And, so if your research so far, if you've been researching TCR complexes on immune cells, or, how does the chirality of a compound affect a drug for infections, interesting things, but what does that really mean? So can you put that in layman's terms, but then also how does that relate to the broader field, not only for like indication standpoint, but the technology, is that applicable to areas outside of the application that you've primarily thought about? So I've always really enjoyed, there's a few email listservs I've been on for a long time. One's Fierce Biotech, the other is Endpoints. And they're both great. You can sign up for different degrees of email blasts, but I get basically a daily digest of relevant news in the field. Company A is buying company B, or company C has initiated a new program in the field of blank. And so I really like that. It's nice. I think it'll help you just understand what's happening out there as you think about different routes. And actually, I found out about Squeeze's. Squeeze had been the company I work for now was a angel funded company. I followed Fierce Biotech. I saw that they got their Series A funding way back in 2015. And I knew they had the resources to expand and hire me, and so potentially, and so I reached out. So that was very helpful. There's also a lot of great people on Twitter who just shared really nice insights. You obviously have to curate and find the right people, but to get a pulse on the industry, I find that useful. I've never had doubts fundamentally. I've always liked medically oriented early stage technologies. And that just really interests me. And so I always figured I'd be in that realm somehow, but it's a complex ecosystem, right? And there's a lot of different specific tracks you can take. And so for me, I guess there's been maybe two major forks. One was choosing medical devices versus biotech, and two was choosing at an early stage, go into business development versus technical leadership. And in both cases, I put myself in a position to try each out, really, and from that I could make a more informed decision. So I think there's no such thing. There are traditional career paths, but make it what you will, and do what's right for you to test out what's right for you. With respect to burnout and balance, burnout is a real risk. There are periods when you just have to grind, and that is what it is. At the same time, I've never been afraid to set aside time for me. And so like in grad school, I'd take chunks of time off to travel. And many weekends I'd fully disconnect, and I'd go on camping adventures. You have a lot of great opportunities at Duke with respect to around Asheville, there's fantastic mountains, and along the coastline, there's also some really nice camping options. In industry, I try to protect my team from work after hours and on the weekend. That being said, if there's a deadline coming up, sometimes you need to invade those times, but try to protect it as much as possible. And I certainly encourage people to take their full vacation allotment. It leads to happier teams and a refreshed mindset. Yeah, I think those are all the questions. So I hope this was helpful, and yeah, let me know if there's any questions or if anyone wants to reach out.